all, it's a great honor for me as ambassador of Cuba to Suriname to be able to come to this distinguished House of Studies, University of Suriname here on the com, because for Cuba it's very important the academic sphere, the academic studies is very big in Cuba. So before that I want to thank, really from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank the quick response that we had from the university board, also from the student representatives in organizing this event. I know it was a little time to organize, I apologize, but thank you very much for that possibility. I just wanted to explain that we wanted to take the opportunity that we have a visitor here in Suriname today from Cuba, which is Mrs. Indira Perez, here with us today. She's came all the way from Cuba for this and other events in Suriname. She's representing an organization in Cuba that has to do a lot with the exchange of people-to-people contact between Cuba and the rest of the world. So I think it's very promising, the possibility that she has the opportunity to explain to you how the institution works in Cuba and the possibilities there are for students to go to Cuba for maybe small courses or small stays in Cuba for 2-3 weeks for exchanges, not only with Cuban students, but also with Cuban youth in general, from Cuba and from other countries in the world who go to Cuba at the same time to do this type of projects, which are very social projects in which students and youth get the opportunity to visit a lot of places in the country and have a lot of experience. So we didn't want to miss the opportunity that she was going to be here on this day, so that's why we pressured a little bit, and sorry for that. I know that the president is on time, but we are very grateful, and we hope this is not the last meeting that we can have, or the last exchange we can have. As the master of ceremony was saying that we were expecting more students, we understand we're in the middle of classes, everything, so for the next time we sure will organize more time. Having said it, thank you very much to the leadership. Thank you students that are here today to hear us out on what we have to say. Of course, we're going to speak about the possibilities of studies in Cuba through the scholarships. That's our main objective, but also we want to give you a small panorama of what Cuba is, where Cuba is situated today, not geographically, because surely you know where Cuba geographically is situated, but geopolitically also, how does Cuba insert itself in the world, and how are relations between Cuba and Suriname nowadays and historically being developed, and how that is of great help to the Surinamese people and to the Cuban people. So having said this, I would start off by saying that Cuba-Suriname relations have been historic in ties. You can date the first contact between Surinamese people and Cuban people from a long time ago. And I'm going to go as back as the Aboriginal people from Suriname, the first inhabitants of South America, which were in this area of the continent, say Suriname, Guyana, French Guyana, and also Venezuela. Those Aboriginal people who were the first inhabitants were actually the first people who arrived in Cuba and established themselves in Cuba. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Many of the Aboriginal people in this area of the country, they decided to expand the frontiers because they were very well established in the forest, and they decided to canoe from one island to another island. So they got to Cuba, hopping from South America all the way through the small Caribbean islands, through the heart of the Caribbean region. I'm talking about Grenada, St. Vincent, Antigua, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba. So more or less geographically, that's the road. So we can trace our origins in Cuba, our first inhabitant Cubans, from this area of the world. So I would say that would be the long-standing historical relations that come between Cuba and Suriname because of that area. Of course, we had after that, as did also Suriname, a very complicated process of colonization by Western countries. In our case, it was Spain. In your case, it was other countries, but in our case, it was Spain. And Spain in the 15th century, when they discovered Cuba, but of course it was not a discovery. There were people already there, and I'm saying that the origins were here from this area of the world. So I'm saying between quotes, discovered Cuba, and they imposed their law, they imposed the force, and they took over the country by violence and through against the will of the local people. Centuries passed, and actually the Spanish were able to annihilate most of the original population in Cuba. So we don't have nowadays a reflection of those ethnicities that were original from Cuba, because the Spanish basically wiped them out because of political and geopolitical reasons. So today in Cuba, you get a mix of population which comes from the Spanish, who were the first Westerners who arrived in Cuba, but they also introduced the African slave in Cuba and the black persons in Cuba. And they also mixed a lot between the two ethnicities, and they created, or was born, the Criollo, the Cuban, let's say, colored person, which was a mix between the Spanish and the African descent. Because I'm telling you, the Aboriginal people were basically wiped out, and they did not integrate that genetic mix of what Cubans are nowadays today. So those were one very dark period for Cuba, although it brought a lot of development, because there was a lot of things from Europe that were brought to Cuba in terms of foodstuff, agriculture, mechanics, in terms of many developments that were brought to Cuba by the Spanish. But of course the country and the Cubans who were born under the colonial power of Spain were determined to be a free country, an independent country, and a country who could decide on their own issues and not have a king who's thousands and thousands of kilometers away dictate the destiny of the country. So that created the process of emancipation in the country for the Cubans trying to overthrow that colonial rule. And it happened. I'm really going very fast on this, but it did happen through the centuries, through fighting, through wars, through different uprisings, and we became, the Cubans were able to overthrow the Spanish colonial rule by the end of the 19th century. History came, and as you know, and you will probably all have studied some history in the past, you know, they also in that period, 16th, 17th, 18th century, was also the birth and the development of the American nation, of the United States of America. And after the Civil War in America, once they made peace in the 18th century, that country had a necessity of expanding its frontiers, of expanding its rule in order to gain benefits from especially natural resources. And Cuba went into that mix. Cuba was one of the territories that was targeted by the Americans in the end of the 18th century to take over from Spain directly and not hand it over to the Cuban autochthonous people who were fighting for independence. So they came into that war between the Cubans and the Spanish, and they intervened basically by the end of the 19th century, I'm talking about 1898, and they intervened in that war, and because they had superior war power, they were able to also defeat the Spanish, and they were able to impose themselves on the island of Cuba in the year of 1899. So that part of Cuba began a period in which we were free from the colonial powers of Spain, but then we were submitted by the ruling of the American government, United States of America in Cuba. And that happened for the rest of the 20th century, throughout the first half of the 20th century. But the Cubans still felt, although the Americans gave a virtual independence to Cuba in 1902, they gave independence for Cuba, was created the Republic of Cuba was really created in 1902, 20th of May, under the American rulership. But the political system was hacked into subordination from the US. So nothing would happen in the country if there was no yes or no from the US. And the Cuban people felt, and they were also that we inherited that tradition from fighting the colonial rule of the Spanish, that we thought that this was not correct, that the Cuban people had the need to take the country in their own hands, to take possession of the soil, to take possession of the national resources, and to develop further the Cuban people in their own way. So a wave of different, let's say, opposition to that colonial rule, from the neo-colonial rule from the US, was born, and that's when the revolution that you have heard a long time in your studies, also in history, the revolutionaries from Cuba, led by Fidel Castro, were the uprising in the mountains against the military regime that was under the orders of the US. Basically, Fidel, of course, for us is huge, but he's no god, he's not superhero. He needed support of the country's people, and he had it. Some of them were supportive military, getting involved in the guerrillas against the army, but many of the citizens were supporting from their own homes by sending supplies to the revolutionary forces, by also making strikes, by also protesting and demanding a change of politics. So Fidel and the Cuban people managed to overthrow that dictatorial regime in Cuba in 1959. And then we actually became really independent, really a country which was having a say for their people throughout the time. So that is 1st of January 1959, talking about already 65 years in time. So from that on, and I'm saying this, I'm sorry if I have been a little bit long in this, but I want to stress that the triumph of the revolution really had an impact on education, really had an impact because at the moment in 1959 when the country was overthrown and the revolutionaries took power, there was a lot of poverty spread around the whole country. At that time, we were a population of around 7 to 8 million, and there was an 80 to 85% of poverty. So you had only small groups of people who were families who owned basically the country. And the first measure that the revolutionary government took was to expropriate that land that was owned by 6 families in Cuba. They owned the whole country, 6 families. Take the land from them and give it to the people who actually were producing and actually were living the land. So that's one of the first measures. But then the new government said, okay, now we give you land, but you have to have education. You have to know how to write, how to read. And those were things that in Cuba were not common. People did not know how to write, people did not know how to read. So education became the center stone of the revolution. And from the beginning, it was stressed that, of course, we need to get people out of literacy. We need to have them learn to write and read. But then they have to go to the pre-primary school, they have to go to secondary school, they have to go to pre-university, and they have to go to university to become people who can develop the country. So that process in the 65 years has provoked that today in Cuba we have 69 universities in the whole country. We have today more than 100,000 students in those universities. And the universities are not in Havana only, they are in the whole country. In all the districts, we call them provinces, you call them districts here in Suriname. So we have 15 provinces in total. And in the 15 provinces, you get universities for everybody. And everybody goes to university for free. There are no charges, there are no charges for any student, and they can do any type of education because the universities are very specialized. You get universities for technical activities, you get universities for humanitarian activities, you get universities only for studying medicine, you get universities only for studying teaching, and you get universities of hard science like biology, like chemistry, all those type of things. So all those universities in the country, they started developing in all these years a huge amount of professionals that were able to develop and be a force, a driving force in the country to develop the country. So I'm talking about this because also in the meantime, the government of Cuba, or the revolutionary government, decided that, okay, we now have an amount of structural educational activity in the whole country, and we can promote the possibilities of other people from other countries to come to Cuba and educate themselves in our own system, in our educational system. So in the 1970s, were the first people who went to Cuba to start as foreign students to start studying in Cuba in those universities. Today, it's very common that you have in our universities, in all of them, all of these that I talked to you about, because we're not one university, in all of them we have foreign students who are doing studies in Cuba, in all fields that you can imagine, from law, from economics, from engineering, from medicine, from teaching, from all types. Not only doing bachelor's and graduate degrees, but also postgraduate degrees also they are doing. So, and more or less I'm arriving to the theme of what you have asked her to explain to you a little bit. There are different ways and different programs for foreign students to go to Cuba and have university education. The first and most important one are the scholarships that Cuba offers for free for many of the countries in the world, especially countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region. But I want to stress that for Cuba, the Caribbean region, including Suriname, when I say Caribbean region for us, it's what CARICOM is included, all the small islands in the Caribbean, plus Guyana and Suriname, Haiti, of course, but this goes outside that archipelago of countries. For Cuba, is a priority because we feel that our natural context, our natural neighbors are the Caribbean people. We are Caribbean also. Spanish speaking, but we are also Caribbean nation. We are in the Caribbean Sea, and we prioritize the possibility of offering scholarships for the Caribbean region. And that includes Suriname, which has been benefiting from scholarships. And when I say scholarships, I say free of charge studies in Cuba. I'm not talking about going to Cuba to spend, but to do education for free. And Suriname has been benefiting from that possibility since the 1990s. And among us, we have a graduate from Cuba, the dean here present with us, which was in the beginnings of the 2000s in Cuba studying as part of that. But he's not only the one. We have more than 200 Surinamese students that have passed through Cuban universities. Today, as we speak, there are 48 Surinamese students in Cuba doing that program of scholarships. So every year, the Cuban embassy in Suriname receives from Cuba an allocation, right, of the scholarships to be offered for the country. And in that sense, I'm very happy and proud to say that the numbers of scholarships have been increasing in the last 2-3 years. For example, last year we had 19 scholarships for Cuba. Of course, not all of them are for, let's say, university degree, because we have such a wide system of education. There are also other types of education, like higher grade education, like technical education, which is not 12th grade, which is further than 12th grade, which is also done in universities. So mainly the scholarships for Cuba are in the medical field, because every country needs doctors. Cuba has thousands and thousands of doctors because we have formed them during the years, and every country usually asks us for scholarships in that sense because they need to strengthen the medical sphere in their countries. So last year, for example, there were 19 scholarships. This year, we are having 20 scholarships this year. So that's a big number. Most of those scholarships that are offered, when I say this year, they're offered this year for starting in the academic year of 2025. So this year, for example, we are having 6 spots for medical studies to become a doctor in Cuba. We have 3 spots for higher education studies, which is not a university degree per se. It's close to a bachelor's degree in health technologies. And what is health technologies in Cuba? In Cuba, we also specialize the people who work in the medical system. For example, microbiology, people who work in the labs. For example, the people who take x-rays. It's not just a person working with the machine, but being able to interpret what the machine says about the person who is being examined. For example, epidemiology, people who are usually constantly looking for different viruses, or how to manage illnesses like dengue, mosquito transmission. So that's very specialized in Cuba, and you can have a higher education degree in that sense. But we also have, for example, the possibility of doing university degrees of 5 years in Cuba in those same spheres. So you will have a title of specialist in this type of medical, let's say, variants. Not a doctor, but different variants where you work in a hospital doing this type of things. And of course, we always offer the possibility. This year, we are offering 3 of postgraduate studies for medical doctors who graduated already in Cuba. That meaning that doctors who finish their studies in Cuba, they come back to Suriname, they can go back again to make a specialization in cardiology, pediatrics, ophthalmology, whichever. So those are 3 spots. So having said this, I also want to explain to you, because it's one of the things the representative asked us to do, is to more or less guide or have a say on how this process works out. So the Cuban government offers the scholarships in very close relation with the governments in each country, because it's a governmental relation, it's a diplomatic relation between the 2 countries, and the embassy actually is not the one who's going to say, you go to Cuba. It's not a position. We offer the scholarships for the government to decide from where and who will be able to go to Cuba and to send to Cuba, because in the end, they will come back to Suriname, and they will have some time they will have to spend working in public spaces or public hospitals in this sense. So we work very close with the Ministry of Education in Suriname. The Ministry of Education has a department of scholarships, and that department of scholarships is the focal point for every Surinamese citizen that wants a scholarship for Cuba. So we can promote it, but in the end, the people who want to apply for the scholarship would have to go to the Ministry of Education and apply for the scholarship for Cuba. Of course, we set some requirements which are very basic. Having a 12th grade degree, having good health, I mean not having an illness that could hamper your studies, having a certain level of grades, which is not super highest grades, but a level of approved grades in your 12th grade studies, and basically that's it. No more requirements. It's just somebody who finished the 12th grade studies and is able to go to university in Cuba. You don't need to speak Spanish because you will be taught Spanish in Cuba. There is no need for that. And the requirements are assessed by us. We say if the requirements are met or not. Ministry of Education, Scholarship Department, they only receive applications and the paperwork, and they take it to the embassy. And then the embassy approves in the end the students that are being presented, for which everyone has applied to. So spread the word that there are scholarships for Cuba available for 2025. We have at this moment, we have not yet presented to the Ministry of Education this new allocation of studies, but we will do it before the year end. So probably from January forward, you can tell your friends, or if any of you are interested, and this, the student representative can also multiply this information with the rest of the students, that from January on, they can all go themselves to the Ministry of Education, Department of Scholarships, and ask for scholarships for Cuba. Then they will give you the requirements of the documents that you have to present, and you will find out from us at what point. Last year, unfortunately, not all the scholarships were met. We only had applications for medical studies, for doctor studies, not for the other variants of education that I was talking to you about. We do get some requests from people to open up scholarships for other areas, like for example engineering, for example architecture, for example nursing, all these other areas. So today we don't have those scholarships for those type of educations, but if there is a general need for that, we can try to accommodate, maybe not for this year, but for the next year to get one or two. So what are the conditions of this scholarship? So under this condition of scholarships, once you are selected and you have been given the scholarship, government of Suriname, and that's why I say that we do through the government of Suriname, government of Suriname takes care of your travel ticket one way to Cuba and one way in return when you finish studies in Cuba. That's something the government of Suriname takes care of. We take care of your whole education in Cuba, so you do not have to spend in accommodation, you do not have to spend in food, of course, and I've been very clear on this, basic food in Cuba, home-baked, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Of course, you will have the opportunity to do whatever you want, but you have that covered, and all of your academic areas will be taken care of. Books, your timetables, everything that you need to do in Cuba will be taken care of. So that is basically it. Of course, you would need the support of your family in Suriname to support you a little bit more with some extra money for some allowance. We do stress sometimes with the government that they should be able to give the students some allowance while in Cuba. Not always works out very well, but it should work. And the basic condition is that once you apply and you are selected for the scholarship in Cuba, you in Cuba will not be some special foreign student coming to study in my special university. You become the same as a Cuban student. So, foreign student coming to Cuba to work, to study, is exactly the same as a Cuban student who is studying in the university. So there is no difference between you. You will be required the same exams, you will be required the same level of interest, you will be needed to participate in all the activities of the university that are required. So there is no special treatment that you get as a foreign student, basically because what we want you is to get the same education that we in Cuba get. So once you travel to Cuba, you have 1 year only for doing Spanish, because of course our universities are in Spanish. So 1 year is for learning Spanish, dominating Spanish in order to be able to have the correct level of academic level. And while you study Spanish, you will also be taught basic subjects, because we want you to be at the same level academically as the Cuban students. so you do not have to fail your first year of exams, you do not have to have hard time. So that first year is just for adaptation, language, academic, and culturally, because Cuba and Suriname are two different countries, we have different cultures, we are not like you that you are so diverse, and as I say, the most diverse country in the world probably is true. Cubans, we are most very similar throughout the whole country. We are, of course, we are white, we are black, we are mulatto, we are mixed, but we do not have differences in that sense. We are one single nation, really. Most people have different religions. Some have African-based religions, some have Christian religions, but it's very difficult to find Asian origin religions or Hindu religions. It's very uncommon in Cuba. You basically get African religions and Christian and that type of religions. But in the end, it's one country and that's how it works. So you have to get acquainted with the Cuban culture, the dynamic of it, the difference, the personal contact. Everything is very different. And we always speak with the students that go to Cuba, and we tell them that you have to travel to Cuba with an open mind. You cannot expect to be in Cuba as if you were in Suriname, expecting the same things you have in Suriname, or expecting the same type of relations you establish in Suriname with with the people that surround you. You have to go with an open, broad mind. And I always tell them, you have to take advantage of the possibility of you as an individual surviving in this different atmosphere. And in the end, after the 5 or 6 years you spend in Cuba, you will become not only a professional in whatever field you chose to study, but you also be very good in life in general, because you will have learning skills that you only learn when you have to be on your own, doing different stuff with different people, with different culture, and adapting to that scenario. So that also has an impact. The education in Cuba is a general education. It's not only academics. We don't want a student to be a perfect A student in academics, but cannot do sports, but cannot do cultural stuff, but cannot relate with the rest of the students, and that cannot participate in many other different stuff. We want them to do everything, including academic issues. So that's what Cuba offers, that's what Cuba does in this type of programs in Cuba. So in closing, I think the word is out. What I said, the possibility of accessing the Cuban scholarships are through the Ministry of Education, Department of Scholarships. In the end, the embassy, of course, has a say in the last word for the people who go to Cuba, and we take the responsibility with the government to send you to Cuba and do this type of education. Of course, and I want also to say, because it's not only scholarship programs, we do have the possibilities for any student in the world to go to Cuba and do any type of study in Cuba through a payment method, with the ¿cómo se dice matrícula? Otra matrícula, no sé cómo se llama. You know, the normal payments you make for university, you know? Yeah. So you can also do that. And in that type of program, in which an individual wants to go to Cuba to study, not in the scholarship program, but he wants to pay, has the possibility to pay his studies in Cuba, he can approach the Cuban embassy for that. And we will provide you with appropriate contacts of the universities in Cuba that you can apply to do this type of education in which you fund your own studies in Cuba. And it has more or less, in the end, the same objective. You will go to a Cuban university, you will be inserted with the rest of the students, and you will get a higher education degree in Cuba. That's it. So those are the two main areas, the scholarships, which are limited, but the other one is unlimited. The other variant in which you fund your own studies is unlimited. So if you have the possibility and you think it's something that you can do, of course, go for it. And in that specific funding of the studies, you can approach the embassy, and we will give you the appropriate contact numbers. So having said this, and I'm going back to the invited guests from Cuba, this is also one of the ways in which Cuba promotes people-to-people contact. Because international relations are, as you know, done at the government level, right? So governments meet each other, they sign MOUs, they exchange information, they have embassies, they have political talks, but in the end, the benefit of all that is the people, right? So Cuba is very interested, and it has done for so many years, to have the experiences of people meeting. Forget about governments, people, real people coming to Cuba to exchange with people in the Cuban community and live with them, go to places with them, experience the life of a Cuban, and vice versa also. So ICAP, which is the Institute of Friendship, or Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, is the organization in Cuba that has that duty. So I'm sure Indira will explain the possibilities that they offer for any citizen, but especially young people who want to live the Cuban experience for maybe 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks in a program, a comprehensive program that includes sightseeing, includes the beach, but includes going to do harvesting jobs in the countryside, to harvest food for the people. It includes also doing voluntary work in the communities. It includes a lot of exchanges of ideas with different people in the country. And those groups that go to Cuba, they come from different parts of the world. So you would be sitting in a program with a Colombian, with somebody from Salvador, with somebody from Haiti, somebody from Suriname, and imagine the mix and the ideas that come from that experience. So that's also a very interesting cultural exchange that can happen, and ICAP is one of the responsible for that. In the future, of course, she will provide her contact numbers, but in the future, if you or any family members or any friend would like to have this type of experience, you can also come to the embassy, contact us, and we will guide you through the process to these are programs that have a very economical cost, because they are not tourism per se. I'm not talking about, we want to go to buy stuff in Cuba and go to the beach. I want to live the Cuban experience. So these people, they will take care of you, they will transport you, they will feed you, they will lodge you, everything, and the cost is really very small in comparison to a normal touristical program, which will just see a nice beautiful beach, a nice beautiful hotel, but you will not see how the Cubans live. You will not see the struggle that the Cuban people have on a daily basis, and you will not learn how is a different culture able to survive in the conditions that Cuba has to live, because Cuba has to live in very special conditions, people, because we have a big enemy against us, which is Americans, which never got over the fact that we stopped them. And we say to the Americans, no, you do not run Cuba, no, you do not own Cuba, and no, we do not do whatever you want us to do. So the American government has not been able to overcome that idea, and for 60 years they've been trying to overthrow our system. So, and I will present Indira at this time, but I want to just leave you with a comment. I want you to when we finish, the possibility to have a Q&A, question and answers, because I know most of you or all of you read in the papers, read in social media about Cuba. And most of the information you get through those channels are usually bad information, catastrophic information, fake news in terms of Cuba is doing this and they're doing that, and the liberties and the human rights and the political system and the communism. So these things, it's very complicated to limit them, because it's open there, it's just there, you open yourself and there is the information. But you do not get, most of you in Suriname, in many parts of the world, you do not get access to the information that has a balance on that. So yes, we do have blackouts. Yes, there are a lot of limitations in Cuba in terms of buying foodstuff and getting basic needs. But do you know why we have those? Because most media and social media, they put a spotlight on what's happening, but they don't put a spotlight on why is it happening. It's very easy to justify it on government. No, government doesn't know what to do in the country. No, look at them, they are submitting their own country. No, but look at the spotlight, put the spotlight on why that's it. And that's why I want to hear you, if you have questions, or if you would like to know some of those reasons, which are very important for us, for you to say. So, with that having said, I'm sorry, maybe I did it a bit longer than I was thinking about, but I would like to propose that the Master of Ceremony introduced Mrs. Indira Perez from the ICAP Institute in Cuba, that she's very willing to show you some of the things that the Institute does and the promotion of the culture. So thank you very much, and I hope you have questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.